Genre: realistic fiction. They Don't Mean It by Lenzi Namioka. Illustrated by John Carrozza. Our family moved here from China 2 years ago, and we thought we were pretty well adjusted to American ways. So my parents decided to give a party on Chinese New Year and invite some of our American friends. When we first came to the United States, we had a hard time getting used to the different customs, but we gradually learned how things were done. We learned American table manners, for instance. We stopped slurping when we ate soup or ramen noodles. At least we didn't slurp when we were with other Americans. When we ate by ourselves at home, we still sneaked in a juicy slurp every now and then. Mother stopped complimenting people here on how old and fat they looked. She learned that Americans thought being old was pitiful and that being slender was beautiful. Father's English pronunciation was improving. He used to have trouble with the consonant R, so instead of left and right, he would say reft and light. Since he's a professional musician, making a correct sound is important to him, and he practiced until he mastered his R. Now he can tell me to pass the Krispies crisply. I worked harder than anybody at doing the right thing, and I even kept a little notebook with a list of English expressions. One of my favorites was "It's raining cats and dogs." I even adopted an American name, Mary. I knew my friends in school would have a hard time with my Chinese name, Yingmei, so now I'm Mary Yang. I really believed that our family had adjusted completely. We had even joined in celebrating American holidays, such as Independence Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Easter, Christmas, and New Year. Western New Year, that is. My parents decided to show our American friends what Chinese New Year was like. Chinese New Year, which falls in late January or early February, is sometimes called the Lunar New Year because it's based on the phases of the moon. It doesn't always fall on the same day in the solar calendar, but depends on when the first new moon occurs after the winter solstice, or the shortest day of the year. Anyway, in China, it's also called the Spring Festival, because by that time you're pretty tired of winter and you're looking forward eagerly to spring. In China, we celebrate the New Year by setting off firecrackers, and we were delighted when we learned that firecrackers were also set off here in Seattle's Chinatown at New Year. But eating special foods is the most important part of the celebration. So a week before the party, we helped Mother to shop and cook the special New Year dishes. We had to serve fish since the Chinese word for fish is yu, which sounds the same as the word for surplus. It's good to have a surplus of money and other valuables. Mother admitted that living in America for 2 years had made her soft, and she no longer felt like killing a fish with her own hands. These days, she bought dead fish, but she always apologized when she served it to our Chinese guests. When we first came to America, Mother used to keep live fish in the bathtub because that way she knew the fish would be fresh when it came time to cook it. Even for the New Year party, she bought a dead fish, but at least she went to a special store in Chinatown where they had live fish and killed it for you on the spot. For our New Year dinner, we also had to have noodles. We normally eat noodles on birthdays because the long strands stand for a long life. Why noodles on New Year then? Because in the old days, instead of having your own special birthday, everybody's birthday was on New Year's Day, no matter what day you were actually born on. The New Year dish that involves the most work is the 10-vegetable salad. Mother tells us that each of the 10 vegetables is supposed to promote health, and eating it on New Year makes you healthy for the whole year. I can understand why some of the vegetables are healthy, things like carrots, bean sprouts, and cabbage, which have lots of vitamins. But the salad also includes things like dried mushrooms and a kind of lichen. When I asked Mother why they were supposed to be healthy, she thought a bit and then admitted that she always included those ingredients because her mother and grandmother always included them. So we got to work. We had to soak the dried ingredients. We had to wash the fresh vegetables and slice them up into thin strips. In addition to all the cooking, we vacuumed every room thoroughly, since we wanted to start the New Year with a really clean house. Mother said that we had to do the cleaning before New Year, because doing it on the day itself was bad luck. It was believed that you'd sweep out good fortune together with the dirt. With all the cooking and the cleaning, I was exhausted by the time our guests arrived at our house for the New Year party. The first of our guests to arrive were the Engs, a Chinese-American family. Paul Eng, their son, was in eldest brother's class. Paul and second sister were beginning to be interested in each other, although we pretended we didn't notice. I was glad that second sister had finally thrown away her Chinese cloth shoes. They had developed big holes, and we could see her toes wiggling around inside. Tonight, she was wearing a new pair of sneakers she'd bought with her babysitting money. The O'Mearas arrived next. Kim O'Meara was my best friend in school, and we'd been at each other's house lots of times. The last to arrive were the Connors. My youngest brother's best friend was Matthew Connor, who was a really good violinist and took lessons from my father. "Happy New Year, Sprout," Matthew said to fourth brother. Sprout was my brother's nickname, because for school lunch he used to eat sandwiches filled with stir-fried bean sprouts. Now he eats peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, just like his friends, but the nickname stuck. Because we had too many people to seat around the dining table, we served dinner buffet style, and the guests helped themselves to the food. When they saw all the dishes arranged on the dining table, they exclaimed at how beautiful everything looked. "Oh no, it's really plain, simple food," said Mother. "I've only added a few small things for the New Year." The guests paid no attention to her and began to help themselves. Mrs. Connor wanted to know how Mother had cooked the fish. Mrs. Eng said that she also cooked fish and served noodles on New Year, but she didn't do the 10-vegetable salad. Maybe it wasn't served in the part of China where her family originally came from. Nobody had complaints about the food, from the way they devoured it and came back for seconds. The kids even ate up the salad. Kim O'Meara laughed when she saw her brother Jason taking a second helping. "Hey, Jason, I thought you hate vegetables." Jason's mouth was full, so he just mumbled an answer. Mrs. O'Meara looked at me and smiled. "I bet you and your mom put a lot of work into making that salad, Mary. Doesn't it hurt to see it disappear in a matter of minutes?" It was a lot of work to make the 10-vegetable salad. I got a blister on my finger from slicing all those celery and carrot sticks. "I'm glad to see how much you people like it," I said. "You'll all be very healthy this coming year." Looking at the platters of food getting emptied, I began to worry. "We'd better do something about dessert," I whispered to Mother. At this rate, our guests would still be hungry after the main courses were finished. "But I never make dessert," Mother whispered back. "Dessert isn't something Chinese normally eat at the end of a dinner." So I ran into the kitchen, found a carton of almond cookies, and hurriedly dumped them on a platter. When I put the platter on the dining table, the cookies disappeared before I could say abracadabra. Abracadabra was one of the words in my little notebook. Since it was a weekday night, people didn't stay long after the last cookie crumb was eaten. There was a congestion at the front door as the guests thanked us for inviting them and showing them what a real Chinese New Year dinner was like. "The fish was delicious," Mrs. Eng said to Father. "I'll have to get the recipe from your wife one of these days. She's a wonderful cook, isn't she?" "Oh no, she's not a good cook at all," said Father. "You're just being polite." I heard a little gasp from my friend Kim. She stared wide-eyed at Father. "What's the matter, Kim?" I asked. Instead of answering, Kim turned to look at Mrs. O'Meara, who was saying to my mother, "I loved your 10-vegetable salad. Even the kids loved it, and they don't usually eat their vegetables. You and the girls must have spent hours doing all that fine dicing and slicing." "The girls did the cutting, and I'm sorry they did such a terrible job," said Mother. "I'm embarrassed at how thick those pieces of celery were." I heard another little gasp from Kim, who was now staring at Mother. But I didn't get a chance to ask her what the problem was. The O'Mearas were going out the front door, and the rest of the guests followed. "How come your father and your mother were so nasty last night?" asked Kim, when we were walking to the school bus stop the next morning. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I didn't remember Father or Mother acting nasty." "It was when Mrs. Eng was telling your dad what a good cook your mom is," replied Kim. "That's right. Mrs. Eng did say something about Mother being a good cook. So what's bothering you?" I asked. Kim stopped dead. "Didn't you hear your dad?" she demanded. "He said that your mom wasn't a good cook at all, and that Mrs. Eng was just being polite. I still didn't understand why Kim was bothered. So what? People are always saying things like that. But Kim wasn't finished. And then when your mom said how hard you worked to cut up the vegetables, your mom said she was embarrassed by what a terrible job you did in slicing. I had to laugh. She doesn't mean it, it's just the way she talks. When the school bus arrived and we got on, Kim began again. Then why do your parents keep saying these bad things if they don't mean it? I'd be really hurt if my mom said I did a terrible job. After I worked so hard, too. What Kim said made me thoughtful. I suddenly realized that whenever people said good things about us, my parents always contradicted them and said how bad we really were. We kids knew perfectly well that our parents didn't mean it, so our feelings weren't hurt in the least. It was just the way Chinese parents were supposed to talk. Finally, I said to Kim, I think that if my parents agreed with the compliments, then that would be the same as bragging. It's good manners to contradict people when they compliment your children. It's bragging only if you say good things about yourself, protested Kim. It's different when your parents are talking about you. I shook my head. We Chinese feel it's the same thing. Boasting about our children, or husband, or wife is the same as boasting about ourselves. People even think it's bad luck. It was Kim's turn to be thoughtful. So that's why your parents never said what good musicians you were. That would be bragging, right? Music is the most important thing in our family. My elder brother plays the violin, my second sister plays the viola, and I play the cello. We all practice very hard, and I know Father thinks we are doing well. Only he has never said so to other people. The funny thing is, continued Kim, your kid brother is the only one in your family who isn't a good musician, but I've never heard your parents say anything about how badly he plays. I thought over what Kim said about fourth brother. He is the only one in our family who is no good at all with music, but we don't talk about his terrible ear. Finally, I said, it's like this. We're not hurt when we hear our parents say bad things about us, since we know they're only doing it because it's good manners. We know perfectly well that they don't mean it. But if they say my younger brother has a terrible ear, they'd really be telling the truth. So they don't say anything because that would hurt his feelings. Kim rolled her eyes. Boy, this is confusing. Your parents can't tell the truth about your playing because it would be bragging, and they can't say anything about your brother's playing because that would be telling the truth. I grinned. Right. You got it. I think Kim understood what I was driving at. She didn't make a face when she heard my mother saying that the cookies second sister baked for the PTA bake sale were terrible. After our spring festival party, the days became longer and cherry trees burst into bloom. The baseball season began, and fourth brother's team played an opening game against another school. My brother might have a terrible ear for music, but he was turning out to be a really good baseball player. In the seventh inning, fourth brother hit a home run, something he had wanted to do for a long time but had never managed before. All his teammates crowded around to congratulate him. You did it, Sprout! You did it! Shouted Matthew Connor, his best friend. Mr. Connor turned to Father. I bet you're proud of the boy. He was just lucky when he hit that home run, said Father. Overhearing the exchange, Kim turned to me and smiled. I see what you mean, she whispered. That Easter, the O'Mearas invited our family for dinner. I knew that Easter was a solemn religious holiday, but what I noticed most was that the stores were full of stuffed rabbits and fuzzy baby chicks. Chocolate eggs were everywhere. For the dinner, Mrs. O'Meara cooked a huge ham. She had also made roast potatoes, vegetables, salad, and the biggest chocolate cake I had ever seen. I had eaten a lot at Thanksgiving dinners, but this time I stuffed myself until I was bursting. The rest of my family did pretty well, too. We all loved ham. As Mrs. O'Meara started cutting up the cake for dessert, Mother said, I'm not sure if I can eat one more bite. That was the best ham I've ever tasted. Aw, that ham was terrible, said Kim. I bet you could do a lot better, Mrs. Yang. There was a stunned silence around the table. Mrs. O'Meara stared at Kim, and her face slowly turned dark red. I heard a low growl from Mr. O'Meara. You and I are going to have a little talk later this evening, young lady, he said to Kim. Our family was speechless with surprise. My parents, my brothers, and sister all stared at Kim. I was the most shocked because Kim was my best friend, and in the 2 years since I've known her, I'd never seen her do or say anything mean. How could she say something so cruel about her own mother? The rest of the evening was pretty uncomfortable. Our family left early because we could all see that Mr. and Mrs. O'Meara were waiting impatiently to have their little talk with Kim as soon as we were gone. Next morning at the school bus stop, Kim wouldn't even look at me. Finally, I cleared my throat. "What made you talk like that to your mother, Kim?" I asked. Kim whirled around. She looked furious. But you were the one who told me that saying nice things about your own family was the same as bragging," she stuttered. "Last night I was just trying to act modest." I finally saw the light. I saw how Kim had misunderstood what I had said. "Listen, Kim," I said. "Chinese parents are supposed to say critical things about their own children."